thy neighbor.
Peace and love. Thank you once again for joining me as we get to know thy neighbor. I'm here today, pleased to introduce a coach, a counselor, a father, most definitely someone you would like to have as your neighbor. You know, as I usually say, let me not talk, let him talk. His name is...
Hi, I'm Michael, and I'm born right here on Long Island. Grew up in Hempstead. My parents moved out to Selden, out in Suffolk County, but realized that my older brother and I needed a little bit more support and while they worked. So they sent he and myself down to South Carolina to live with my grandmother from first grade all the way to sixth grade, and before returning back to Long Island for junior high school, and thereon. Some of the differences that I saw between Long Island and moving to South Carolina, instantly, for example, I went to a segregated school when I was in first grade. It didn't happen when I was in New York. Of course, everything was already integrated, but this is the late 60s, and the school that I went to, W.E. Park Elementary School, was segregated for that first year, my first grade year, and then thereafter, when I was in second grade, I was part of, and my older brother, we were part of the first integrating classes in that area. I thought that was significant. One thing that I did notice, and one thing I would say, is even when the school was segregated, you always had a support system. Everybody looked out for each other. All the teachers knew each other, and of course, my grandmother was a teacher at the elementary school that I went to, so I always saw teachers that knew my grandmother, they knew who I was, and so there was always a connection and everybody looking out for each other. That continued even after the school's integrated, but I just thought that coming and actually going to a segregated school, reflecting back, was something that didn't happen on Long Island. The schools weren't segregated on Long Island, but clearly the communities were. So, in the classrooms, everybody was together. But then after that, when you went home and so forth, I just remember everybody dispersing and going to their different parts of the community and so forth. And that even happened in Hempstead growing up, But when I going back down to South Carolina, it was just really about community. Everybody looked out for each other. There are some differences, as far as living on a farm versus, initially coming from the suburbs of Long Island. We had every kind of animal. We had, pigs, we had goats, we had cows, chickens and so forth. And I can, remember helping to, we even had to chop wood. That home that we lived in when we first got there was not one that had, inside plumbing or anything like that. This was like the late 60s to early 70s. And I can remember, taking baths in a galvanized tub where we had to heat the water and so forth, where we had to go out to the wood pile and chop wood, bring it in. We had one of those old stoves that you had to, cook, we literally cooked the food on. So the house that we had was the original home that my mother was born in, and many of my other family members were born in. It was a house that was built probably in the early 1900s, and it survived until probably about the 1980s where it was taken down. Some of the things that I think my grandmother gave me a foundation in is always looking out for family first. We always rallied around family. She took my brother and I all around from Aiken, South Carolina to Edgefield, South Carolina. This is your cousin. This is your cousin over here. This is, she would always introduce us to different family members, and we learned right then that there was, you always had that bond and that you would look out for each other, because I can even remember there were times where she would have to go to a meeting in the afternoon or something like that, and she would leave me with my cousins in Aiken. Or, sometimes we stayed with a friend or a family in Edgefield, when she had to do stuff. So again, everybody always looked out for each other. It was very, very close-knit. I've been married. How long have I been married? 27 years. 27 years, a wonderful wife. I have 2 children. I have a son that's he's getting ready to graduate high school, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do next. And I have a daughter that's she graduates in December of this year. some of the ingredients for a long-term relationship, long-term marriage, for us, it allowed us to keep it going, keep reinventing ourselves, communicating, not letting the outside distractions get in your household. Staying away from, I'm not really one to be out in the street a lot or anything like that. So, like James Brown used to say, don't start none, won't be none. So if I'm not in those places where, things can get in the way, then it can never happen. My parents have always reiterated family. My mother and father have always said, home first. My mother used to always say, she says, the street is the street, and your home is your home. She said, if you stay at home or if you stay close to home and you look out for each other, there's nothing out there that can defeat you. And there's nothing that can get you. Always remember home first. And my family is, when I say family, as in my parents, as in my grandparents, and so I've always stressed that. So that's obviously something that I've also passed on to my children. Stress family first. You start home and then you work your way out, and just always remember the street is the street and your home is your home. And you better know the difference. Thinking about how my family history influenced what I do and I think helped project and put me on a successful path, it goes back to just knowing who I was and where I came from. My family had always talked about, knowing that my great grandfather came from Africa and that he was able to survive the journey over. And then, they always told stories about, what he did and what he impressed upon what he wanted the family to do. And so just knowing and having a grounded connection and knowing where your great-great-great-grandfather came from, which is something that not many African Americans do know, was important. Looking at Africa and thinking about being, having a connection to Africa in a positive connotation was super important to me. One of the things that was important as far as me thinking about athletics, I always said that when I came back to New York, that I was going to join something, because what kept me from participating in athletics in South Carolina was the fact that we lived on a farm that was about 15, 20 minutes away, almost 30 minutes away from where everybody practiced. So it was impossible for me to join Little League or do football or anything after school because the travel was too great. So one of the things I said is when I came back to New York, I was going to participate in sports. When I got back to New York and I was going to 7th grade, first thing I did is join a summer softball team and play softball. And then right after that, I always said I was going to play football. So then I joined the local football team and played. And then from then, playing football from there. I played football from 7th grade all the way through college. Here's an interesting story: is when I was in junior high school, my gym teacher said, "Oh, you're a pretty good athlete. Why don't you play lacrosse?" And so he gave me a lacrosse stick, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to play lacrosse. I'm thinking I'm going to play in the spring." And took the stick home, and I was practicing over the weekend and so forth. Came in on that Monday when lacrosse started, and I was throwing it around. I'm throwing the ball around, and I'm looking across at the track, and all the girls are on the track team. And I'm watching them run around, and I'm watching all the girls, and I said, And I went to the coach that next morning. I thought about that night, and I turned the lacrosse stick, and I said, Mr. Shea, his name was Mr. Shea. Here, Mr. Shea, I think I'm gonna run track. And from there, I continued to run track and field. And so, I ran track and field in junior high school. I was fortunate enough to win several county championships, won one state championship, a runner-up in another one. Did well enough to earn a scholarship in track and field. Initially was going to go to the University of Virginia. I'd signed to go there in the summer where I was supposed to report about a week before. They changed the conditions of my scholarship, so instead of going to Virginia, I ended up going to Auburn University in Alabama. Went there, I ran track my freshman year. I tore my quadricep in my freshman year, which kind of really put a close on track and field, or put it to the point where even after I recovered, back then they didn't have all the rehabilitation techniques and stuff that they have now, so it was really tough. So I ended up not doing any sports for about a year or so, where I was just a student, at Auburn, because I was still pursuing and trying to get my degree. And then, one thing about, being around other athletes, because that's what happened, is we're all athletes around each other and so forth. And I'm looking and I'm watching the guys playing football and I'm saying, listen, I don't see where they're we're that much better or something that I couldn't play. So I ended up walking on and playing at Auburn. And I played 2 years. I played two years of football, lettered in football at Auburn. Played special teams. Played light special teams. I think that if I hadn't had another year of eligibility, I would have been put on scholarship because that's what the discussion was. The only problem was you only have 4 years of eligibility, and so when they were considering, they were hoping to get another year, and that wasn't going to happen. So I ended up playing, played my senior year and so forth. My junior and senior year, I played there. And at the conclusion of that, it was, while others wanted to continue and take shots at, being free agents for, pros and so forth, I just wasn't really interested in that. Other people said that, yeah, you should give it a shot and so forth. But for me, if I wasn't interested, I don't care what they said. They wouldn't be the ones that would be out there. So, I was ready to move on. I had an interest in art. I've been an artist since I was a kid. I used to copy stuff that copied things out of the comics. I did my own comics when I was a kid. I was a big comic book fan. So every Friday, as a kid, my grandmother would give me $1 and give my brother $1 and say, all right, you guys can go to the store, get whatever you want. And at the time, $1 could get you a lot. So, at that time, I think, the comic books, I can remember them being 12 cents. And then the prices started going up, but I would sit there and I would read certain comics, and I had, certain favorites, and I would buy comics every week. And then, I would look at that and copy and draw stuff that I'd seen there. And, from there, I just would continue in, trying to foster that creative side. I began to, as I got a little bit older, look at different types of medium to work with, not only, just pen and ink, but also, looking at, paint, watercolor, markers, and so forth. So I've dabbled off and on with that, and I think I rediscovered more of a passion for that, actually during the pandemic. I was able to think about it, when we were kind of at home and you run out doing other things. I had a lot of time to rediscover that passion and start to work on some things. I've gotten some things done. And I continue to do some stuff. I'm working on something now. I have, when it hits me, I work on it. My journey to become an educator originally started actually, when I got out of college, I ended up working as what they call exploring executive with the Nassau County Boy Scouts of America, where I raised money for programs. And I was what they called an exploring executive. I ran their youth division for the entire Nassau County. And a lot of that was working with bankers and running dinners and golf tournaments and things like that to try to generate funding so that we could, again, keep those programs running throughout the year and so forth. So, I did dinners and, I did telethons and all kinds of stuff to raise, thousands of dollars for the programs to keep them going. But what also happened is I started to look in and thought, okay, I was just interested in doing a little bit more. I found a position working as a director for a program in Harlem. It's called, it was for an agency called Boys Harbor Incorporated, which is actually, I think they're still around. But being a director for one of their programs allowed me to, because I always wanted to, I wanted to work a little bit closer with folks that needed my help. I felt I could help the most. So in directing the program in Harlem, what I found is I used to work with junior junior elementary schools and intermediate schools. Junior high school 43, IS 195 over on the west side, between 125th and 137th Street, you would find these schools and so forth. And working with junior high kids, I just really enjoyed it. I ran after school programs. I ran trips that would go to, for college visits. I started a program where we worked and integrated with Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. So I had future doctors of America. I had kids that were going in and working with doctors on the weekend. I had a program that I ran that we engaged, and we had a partnership with the American Museum of Natural History, where I had kids that were going in on Saturdays and working with the science. Well, I was more science-based because I love science also. Working with the scientists there, so it was giving them exposure to potential careers and broadening their horizons. What happened is just in working with young people, I could immediately see the impact. And so immediately seeing the impact made me think about, well, maybe this is something I want to consider, because the business aspects, because I have a degree coming out of Auburn, I had a degree in international business. So, doing the business aspects and so forth, while it was something that I began to develop an expertise in, it wasn't something that fulfilled me. Ultimately, I found another position working with the College of New Rochelle, where I was what they call a retention coordinator, which is working with students in the College of New Rochelle, trying to keep them in school, right? And trying to look for ways to find funding for them if they had problems getting books and so forth, and setting up support systems so that, they would stay and continue and earn their degree. And so working there, what also it allowed me to do is go to the College of New Rochelle and work on my master's in school and counseling. So, and I don't know if they still do it now, but many, in that time, it was full of reimbursement. So if I'm working for the institution, which I also became an adjunct professor and taught classes. So if I'm teaching classes and I'm working there, then I could get my master's and didn't have to pay. And so I was able to get my degree in school and counseling. And ultimately earning my degree in school and counseling, which, at that time was guidance counselor. Sometimes now the name has been changed to school counselor. I have a degree in a master's in school counseling, which allowed me to now start to look for a position in a school district where I can have the greatest impact. And when I became a school counselor, I found a position at Hempstead High School. And when I first worked at Hempstead High School, I was just a school counselor, and I used to work night school. But the athletic director found out that I used to run track at Auburn and so forth, and he would always say, well, what do you think about coaching? And he'd come back to me, what do you think about coaching? I would tell him I can't coach because of the fact that in order to coach, it would be at the same time that I was working night school, and I couldn't be in two places at the same time. So he came back the next year and said, what do you think about coaching? And ultimately what happened is the coach that they had at that time had given up the position, so the program was defunct or it wasn't running. And so that after 2 years at Hempstead, I said, you know what, I think I'm gonna make that transition, because I'd run track. I'd been a track athlete in college and so forth. So I think I knew enough about the sport to give it a shot. So ultimately what I did is I made the transition over. Coaching at Hempstead High School, took over the boys program, and I did the boys program from 2004 to 2009. I think that we were pretty successful. We had a number of kids that were really good. We had 8 state champions. Probably in that span from 2004 to 2009, probably had about 70 all-county selections. We had county championships. Amongst the guys that I coached, we probably won about 20-something county championships. They had broke about 7 school records. One kid had broken the Long Island record in 600 meters at the time and so forth. Several kids went on to get scholarships, and one of the kids, his name is Ali Beauvais, he went on to first to the University of Nebraska, then to Lincoln University, and ultimately finished up as an All-American intermediate hurdler and a pro runner. He was an All-American intermediate hurdler at Albany.
Coach has always been the model example of how I want to be as a man. He's he's a very, he leads his life in faith. He's a provider, he's a husband. He's such a genuine person. He cares for his family, and he cares for everyone who comes across his life. He's like literally the ball of light that, guided many children out of, dark situations, including myself. And I'm so grateful that I've met him. I'm so grateful that he's been a part of my life. And I'm so grateful that, he continues to help people and continues to keep that inspiration going in this world. So, I love him.
Took some time off to raise my family. And even while I was raising my family, I got together with some of my coaching buddies. Charles Gilreef, who's I think ultimately will be a Hall of Fame coach from Freeport High School, and Lenroy Raffington, who I coached with at Hempstead High School, who I think should be a Hall of Fame coach. Working together, we put together Long Island Elite track and field program for kids in the area. The difference between Long Island Elite track and field versus some of the other clubs that are even here on Long Island is we made ours community oriented and community based. You could not run for Long Island Elite track and field unless you did community service. So even if you were elementary school kids, even if you had to help your neighbor put out the garbage or help somebody rake their leaves, you had to do that, and you had to write a one-page essay that said, this is what I did. For the high school athletes, they had to do community service somewhere around, whether they did something during the year, they had to show us proof, and they had to write a 2-page essay to verify that they had done that, otherwise they couldn't run. But we were more of an instructional based program, whereas we did that in the summertime to teach kids techniques and so forth about the sport, introduce young ones or new ones to the sport itself, so that we're hoping that they would fall in love with it. For those who had already been running, it's just about teaching them things that will make them better for the next year. And the reason we didn't compete as intensely as some of the other clubs that do stuff in the summertime is because many of the athletes that we had were coming from programs where they were involved in athletics in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring. So at what point do you give to give these kids an opportunity to rest and relax? So my philosophy has always been, as a coach, is at some point you got to give your body a chance to relax and recuperate and rejuvenate. Even the pros don't run all year round. So why would you think that a 13, 14, 15-year-old would do that and be successful? I'm a firm believer in the phrase that's a common phrase. It's called pay it forward, right? And I've always thought about those that influenced me and helped me and so forth. And I said, wow, when I get older, I want to do what they did. I think about a Colbert Britt who used to coach at Malvern High School. He's passed away now, may he rest in peace. A Hall of Fame track and field coach, Norm Tate, who's down in Maryland now. He's still coaching and so forth. Norm Tate and other coaches that they've worked with us. Al Krauser, who's my high school coach, who worked with me. I think about the impact that they had, and as far as just encouraging you to give your best, and not only that, but just to have fun. Norman Van Exel, may he rest in peace, who coached at Hempstead. They were part of a summer program that was very much like Long Island Elite. It was called Long Island Alliance. And it took kids from all the different communities, from Hempstead, Roosevelt, Uniondale, Freeport. We all ran together. Even though we competed against each other during the year, we came together in the summertime, and we just had so much fun. And trying to replicate that and give others the opportunity to do that is something I always wanted to do, because the way I look at it is like this, and this is what I explain to my athletes. 99% of them, by the time that they finish, if they compete all the way through high school, once you finish high school, you're going to be an ex-athlete, right? You're going to be an ex-athlete. Maybe 1% of all athletes to participate in particular for high school athletics will get an opportunity to continue on, whether it's Division I, Division II, whatever it is. 99% of them will be ex-athletes, but their time while they're on a high school team or involved like that, you get an opportunity to have a great time with the kids you grew up with. Think about it. These are the folks that you've known since elementary school. You get to roll with your crew. You get to roll with your boys, and you get to have experiences that you'll never forget. I still have guys that we still talk about, former teammates and so forth. We still talk through social media, or even when we see each other, about remember the time this, remember the time that. So, the charge for me, and I would hope that any coach, is to make sure that they have good memories. I tell my guys, I want you to have good memories. I want you to have enough of and great enough of a time so that you can talk junk at the barbershop and lie about what you did and what you didn't do, but have something to talk about And you have that camaraderie with the folks, because once you graduate from high school, everybody goes and has the opportunity to pursue their dreams at any corner of the earth. And so you're no longer together with those people that you spent your formative years with. So have the fun and have these great memories, and if we're good enough, then we'll win a couple of things. Maybe maybe we're blessed enough to win a championship here or there, and maybe one or two or three of you over that time will be granted the opportunity for a scholarship. But again, you do it together, and that's something that's super important. So that's what happened for me, and I definitely wanted to make sure that, again, pushing it forward, playing it forward, passing it forward, and creating those conditions for this generation. I can remember the moment, thinking about what made me think that I made the right decision to be a school counselor. I can remember the student's name. I can remember her name was Miss Dixon. I can remember it was probably the second year. No, it was probably the first year. First year I was working as a counselor. And she came running back into the high school, and and she had also was a participant in night school. And she came running back and she said, I'm gonna graduate. And she was so excited, because at the beginning of the year, she was struggling in everything. She was drowning. And just by encouraging her and saying that you could do that, and having her also to pick up the additional classes in night school, I just remember the excitement in her face and how she spoke. When she realized she was going to graduate. And from right there, I was hooked. My philosophy when working with young people is I think the focus for me is always trying to get them to see what they're capable of doing, realizing their capabilities. I always, on some kind of way, think of it as if I hold a mirror up to them and show them that this is what you can be. Don't discount yourself. Have greater confidence, gain that confidence, and understand that if you put your mind to it and you have realistic goals, that you can get them done. My deal as a counselor is always to try to get kids to graduate with the most appropriate ideas and goals for the future, not something that's unrealistic and something that they could never do. Just looking at those things that work best for them. One of the mentors that I look at is he was the pastor for the church that I used to attend, St. Paul Community Baptist Church. His name is he's now Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood. He was Pastor Youngblood at the time, and I say he was a mentor simply because of the fact that the way that he introduced and ran his church was something that was realistic to me. He always talked about affirming that we were Africans in this country, and affirming that we have to understand where we fit in the historical context of this country. He introduced the Ma'afa, which is talked about the travesty that happened when we were enslaved and brought this country, and that we needed to recognize it. He used to say that the way out is back through, and dealing with what you came through to understand where you are. He always reaffirmed and emphasized that to be a strong black man would also include that you must make connections with your family. If you weren't with your natural fathers and so forth, you try to make those connections so that you could be complete. He always talked about that you could have emotions. That you weren't supposed to be some kind of macho this or macho that, and he also, I think one of the greatest emphasis for me was to get away from this European idea of Jesus Christ to look like this hippie that somebody copied when the artisans of those days made not photos, but they had paintings of their cousins and so forth. And he's like, no, Jesus was a black man. What allows me to try to stay calm in the midst of a storm, and having that inner peace is my faith. Recognizing that there is always a power that's greater than I am, and understanding, not so much about religion, but about the spirituality of things, and knowing that there's a greater power, and that there are things out there that are bigger than I am. I have gray hair. I say I earned it. I earned it by going through situations that allow me to say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let me just stay with the things that gave me positive outcomes, and that's what I focus on. So a message I like to share with my neighbors would be, after coming through COVID and so forth, what I found is it's important that tomorrow is not promised. Tomorrow is not promised, which means that if you're going to pursue a dream, if you need to go for a checkup to make sure that you're okay, if you need to resolve issues you have that are out there with somebody in your family or a coworker or a friend or whatever, resolve it.
LabofNoyzes.